morning, everyone. Hey, this is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box podcast, brought to you by Historical Conquest. Now, we're going to be talking about ancient Israel, right? This is what we were planning on for Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now we're going to be talking about something that, again, well, before I get into what we're going to be talking about today, I want to talk to you about a discussion that I was part of yesterday. Now, this discussion was on, is the Bible a historical document? Okay, per se, it is not. Let me just put this, give two caveats. First off, it is not. The Bible itself is not a historical document in the sense that it's all history, because there's religion in it. This is a religious document. But the way that you actually find out if it actually can be used for history is you compare it to different things that we found afterwards. So I heard from one of my historians, probably like 3 years ago, that the Philistines were not there when the Israelites were actually in that area the first time. We're in Canaan the first time. And so the mention of the Philistines wasn't actually real. Well, it's interesting because just recently they've actually found out that the better translation of it is, or the better understanding of who these people were, whether they were the same people both times, were called the people of the water. So the translation for their name was actually the people of the water, which means that it was those people living in a certain area that came over and interacted with Abraham and, sorry, not Abraham, but the early Hebrews. And then they went into Egypt and came back. And then there's the question of, when did they actually leave Egypt? We've already had this discussion. We had this when we were talking about ancient Egypt, but we also had this just last week with ancient Israel. When did they exactly leave Egypt? No one's sure, because there's not much writings on them. Now, some would say, oh, there's no writings on them, so they're not actually real. Well, then you have to go into the further documentation that's in there. Two things that are very important. When people say that the Bible is not real, it can actually be backed up by archaeology now. The first, starting off with some of the stelas in Egypt. They actually have the name of Israel, and also multiple times refer to the people from Canaan being part of the Hyksos people. Again, remember, the Hyksos were the invaders that took over Lower Egypt just by migrating in, and then there was conflict between Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. But the reason for that controversy that the Hyksos could actually come in is because Egypt was having a huge internal strife, such as one of the strifes that we've talked about during the discussion of Egypt was when all of a sudden they started trying to tear apart the government from the priesthood, the Egyptian priesthood that was there. So when they tried to tear them apart, the priesthood moved to Lower Egypt. The government spent more of Upper Egypt. I say Eastern, Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is where the government stayed, and that area was taken over because the priesthood was not military, while the government was very military-esque. So this is a question of when and where. But there's another part. Some people like to say there was no King David. This was actually part of the discussion. Well, the archaeologist that was with us was in this discussion was talking about, actually, King David is mentioned in modern archaeology. So this is quite fascinating. Some of the discussions of what happened with a lot of the information. So what happened somewhere in the 600 AD? Muhammad was born. After Muhammad died, a lot of his people started to attack certain areas such as Egypt and took over Egypt. They also took over Israel. They took over Israel, and by doing so, they actually started tearing out. We talk about this all the time. When a new leader comes in, starts messing with the history, because you want to be able to prove that your history is right and their history is wrong because there's no evidence of it. Well, what happens? Wait a minute. You destroyed all the evidence. So how is there evidence? And I'll show you a modern day occurrence of this. So who owns the Temple on the Rock? That's Muslims. So the Islamic believers have control over the Temple Mount. And yes, there is a Wailing Wall where the Jews can actually worship. But there's been a division allowed in the city where the Muslims actually control where the temple was. Now, interesting enough, when the Muslims came in back 600 to current days, it's documented that they actually started trying to root out the history, remove the history. Now, you want to see some modern day times? Okay, what's happening with Temple on the Mount right now? A lot of the dirt, a lot of the archaeological findings and things like that are no longer being able to be found because the Muslims are taking truckloads of them and dumping them in the landfills. That's right. So they're developing their land. They're taking huge truckloads, getting them out of there and dumping them in landfills. So the archaeologists, in order to find this information, this stuff, they have to go sift through chip wrappers and other types of trash mixed in with old coins and old documents. That's right. So they are currently, as of today, still moving out those truckloads. But here's the thing. Those truckloads are dumping where the archaeologists can dig, which allows the archaeologists to actually go through all the landfills and try to find some of the documents that are still not destroyed and that are still available. So again, around 700 BC, AD, after Muhammad died, so somewhere around there, when they took over Israel, and haven't gone through it, actually we have, it's at the back of the curriculum. I just don't have it in my notes. What happened? So 700 to 800 AD, you had the Muslims came in, took over Jerusalem, took over basically the whole kingdom of Judah. Now, interesting enough, here's another one that's interesting. You know the walls that are around Jerusalem? I thought that they were of ancient times, but actually, they're only around 500 years old. They were actually created by the Muslim Caliphate, the Islamic Caliphate that moved in. They created a wall in order to secure their area in Israel. And it was only, what, 100 years, less than 100 years ago, when Israel was given the land back to be able to have a nation of their own. And this is after World War II, when they were persecuted and went through the Holocaust. So the United Nations and a lot of governments basically said, we're taking this section and giving this back to you because it was actually owned by the Hebrews. All the way back, well before the Islamic Caliphates, well before 0 AD and the Romans. And so because they owned that area, they decided during the after World War II to give it back to them. Okay, so this is before there was no Palestine, there was no Gaza, there was no Palestinians, there was Jews or Israel and the 12 tribes of Israel. So now the discussion basically went back to, is the Bible a historical document? Here's the thing. Until the point where you can actually prove some of the things in the Bible, it's hard to say that it was could actually become a historical document. But because now things are being proven through archaeology that it is actually a historical a document. Now, maybe not, now just putting us out there, maybe not the Bible as the Christians have it, but actually the Torah, which is basically the first 5 books of Moses. Again, that's what tells about ancient Israel. Now, everything after that point would also be a historical document if you can prove what it says. Now, you have the Jews that say it's true. You have the Christians that say it's true through the Bible. But to a lot of archaeologists, a lot of historians, a lot of agnostics, they cannot accept that the Bible would actually be true. And I'm not saying the religious side, I am saying just the history side. But when you can prove that those certain things are there, that those certain things that happened, oh, and I think I lost track and I went off on a rant. Going back to David, the archaeologist that was there, sorry, the historian that was there said that doesn't exist. King David, there's no documentation that he actually existed. Well, actually, modern days, the last 20 years, there have been seals that say the kingdom, I think it was the kingdom of David. Well, no seal would actually say kingdom of David. And this is a correspondence with another country. I think it was Syria. So again, this was a conversation. Nothing was recorded. So I don't have that, but I can actually find you the seals, what they're called. But according to this archaeologist, there are seals that were found and letters that were found from other countries that actually say the kingdom of David. Well, there wouldn't be a kingdom of David if there was no David. Well, and there's other things that actually point back to it as well, smaller things as well. But again, with the destruction of history, it's really hard to tell. So that's why a lot of times you could only have to go through the religious documents that are available. Again, if we're learning about Egypt, we're going to learn about them through the Book of the Dead. When it comes to the Aztecs and the Mayans, we're going to learn about the codexes. None of those were just history. They were mixed in with religion, especially the Book of the Dead. Huge amounts. Things that were plastered, hieroglyphics, or hieroglyphics, the writings that were written by the Egyptians, the drawings that were written by the Egyptians, all those are religious based as well. So are you going to discount all those because they're a religion? You can't. You can't. Otherwise, we don't have anything. Because here's the thing. If you have, say you're in our archaeological dig, let's just say somewhere that's like neutral. We'll say a Roman fortress, and you find coins. Well, great. Now you found coins that had to do with, let's say, Carthage. Okay, there's a connection there. How is it connected? Don't know. I wasn't there. Okay, is there any writings about it? No, just what's in this religious document. So we have to disregard that because it's a religious document. Okay, is there anything else that we can somewhat get some information from? No, sadly, there's not. Why not? Because the only writings that are still here are the religious documents, the codexes, the Book of the Dead, the Bible, or sorry, let me just say the Torah. Okay, so we have to discount everything that's written. Well, we do have this historian who was, no, let's see, we're talking about Romans. We could do that with this Egyptian historian or this Muslim historian who favors Egypt. Now, when did he write his stuff? Well, he wrote his stuff, again, Muslims weren't even around until 700 AD, so well after all these things happened. So this historian just wrote down everything he got from oral tradition. Well, how viable is oral tradition? Not really. Because oral tradition changes every time you tell it. Have you ever played the game of telephone? Hello? No, this is actually talking on the phone. No, telephone is when I whisper something to you, you whispers it to Sally, Sally whispers it to Joe, and on around until it gets back to me. And then the message is completely different. So the only writings that we can use that are historically viable, I won't say accurate, viable, even if they're religiously based, are those religious documents. Because most of the other ones were destroyed. The reason why they kept the historical documents around was because people actually had concerns for them. All those other documents, I mean, look at your taxes. You collect bills. After 7 years, the IRS can't go after you for taxes. What's a person going to do if they keep all their history, their financial history? After 7 years, there's no reason to keep them around. Throw them away. So what happens to the non-religious documents? Throw them away. Burn them. Destroy them. What happens when another conqueror comes in here? Burn, destroy, I mean, everything. And so then you have to question, well, then maybe we have to accept a little bit of the religious documents. Great. Now we've set a standard that, yes, for a basic understanding, because they were writing it at the same time that they were living it and writing down the religious parts of it. So they're writing the history and the religious at the same time. Then we can agree on it. Now, when it comes to creation in the Bible, or when it comes to the flood, or when it comes to the Leaning Tower of Pisa, no, the Tower of Babel, can you say that that's a historical document? No, that would be based on oral history. But here's the thing. Just like I said, if you can get other witnesses that show it, you have Mesopotamia, which actually has the ziggurats that they actually say is most likely what they were talking about with the Tower of Babel. You have Mesopotamia. Now, again, this is just Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia has the list of the kings, which goes all the way back to what? The flood. And in the flood, it actually talks about it. So yeah, when it comes to creation, that one I can't help you with. There's no real religious documents. Because if you're coming from a religious point of view, God would not want you to actually have full proof that he's around. Anytime. He won't let it, well, the naysayers could say, well, that just shows that it's not actually true. Well, no. Because there's no faith. And faith is a big part of religion, especially when it comes to Christianity. You have to be able to have faith in their God. In God. Now, the faith in God is basically saying, I believe in you, and I will follow these things, even if I don't know it's true. That is the essence of faith, hope, charity. This is the essence of God wanting you to do things because he says it, not because he's proving it to you, not because he's going to answer every why. Sometimes you have to believe. Now, again, that's the religious side. Push that to the side. So the Jews have a history. It's written down. So the best thing we can do is take from that history, maybe even with a grain of salt, which is fine, and get something from it. Structures of history. Maybe not, maybe there's biases in there. Okay, that's okay. Because in history, you want to be able to see how the world is actually structured by any kind of documents that you already have. Now, if something gets proven wrong, then that's one thing. And then you can strike out that one thing. But you have to be able to accept that some of those things in the Bible or any religious documents, even the Quran, other documents that you might not agree with, are actually factually true. Now, let's go into why I'm bringing this up. This is the biggest one where people really are going to question if it's actually true. Because it has to do with miracles. You can believe it, I can believe it, but it doesn't matter. It's what you can actually prove when it comes to teaching history. Now, let's go into what we call the Exodus. Now, this would be found in Exodus in the Bible or the Torah. Well, I don't think it's called the Exodus in the Torah. But the Exodus in the Bible, this basically talks about Moses, his learning of God, him being accepted into the royal courts as a Hebrew in an Egyptian court, and then leaving and coming back and freeing all the Hebrew slaves. Now, again, let's go through some important factors to go through first before we get all the way into this. Okay, and I've already run up a lot of time by just discussing the history of it. So in about 10 minutes, I'm going to be explaining this whole thing, and I'm going to let you do more research. So first off, the Hebrews. Were they in Egypt? We've already talked about this. Most likely, yes. It's actually a very, 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 very good chance that they were actually in Egypt, especially if they came down with the Hyksos, and when the Egyptians were expelling them, took them slaves, which is what they did. That was proven. That is fact. Now, did they actually bring Hebrews? No one can actually say, because it doesn't actually say Hebrews. Now, it does say Israelites, so that's an interesting thing, in the stelas. But most of the history's already been reconstructed by additional pharaohs that came in afterwards. But what we can tell is the drawings that are there, the hieroglyphics that are there, not hieroglyphics, Egyptian, the drawings on the wall, hieroglyphics. For some reason, it just doesn't sound, I don't know. Anyways, the drawings on the wall for Egypt, they have images of not just black or brown, but even white slaves in that area. Now, is it saying it's Hebrew? And I'm not even saying white. I'm saying like tan. But is that even saying that those were Hebrews? No, it's not. Again, you can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, but you also can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's not true. So, what did the slaves do in Egypt? The slaves that we are now saying, as part of this historical study, were some Hebrew. Now, they're also a mix of other countries as well, because they conquered a lot of different land. The Egyptians did. And when new lands came in to conquer, like Nubia, they released the Nubians, but they didn't release them all because they needed slaves as well. So they kept slaves in there too. Okay, so let's go into their tasks. Construction laborers, agricultural work, domestic servants, agriculture as in food production, harvesting, farming. So much like the slavery that we had back a few hundred years ago, or 200 years ago, before the Civil War, the Egyptians did the same thing. And so they had these people work for them, and a little bit different though. There's a little bit of difference in there. But they worked in agriculture, domestic servants, as I was saying. So they work in the household as a servant, or craftsmen and skilled laborers. If you knew a craft, they'd actually make you a craftsman. It would actually get you a little bit higher class, per se, of the slaves. So still a slave, but a higher class of slaves. So these are different things. You can actually read this in the curriculum. I'm reading it right from the curriculum here because I didn't have time to put notes together. Okay, now you can learn about the living conditions of the slaves. Again, it's not just saying the Hebrew slaves, it's saying all slaves in Egypt. So then it goes through the control and supervision of the slaves. So you had a hierarchy of Egyptians that would look over their slaves and would give them certain tasks and would also punish them. But you also had the ability in the curriculum to actually read about the culture, the daily lives of these people. So all these slaves were actually having lives. Now, I won't say normal lives, having lives within slavery. They weren't just slaves. No one is just a slave. Everyone is an actual person with an actual story. So you can go through a lot of these things in the curriculum. But let's go through this. Who was Moses? Moses was a Hebrew that during a time, now there is no proof of this, there was a time that the pharaohs thought the Hebrews were getting too powerful, too strong, too overpopulated. And so went in and killed all the young Hebrews, all the baby males, which is interesting because females are the ones that create the babies, but the males are the ones that, talk to your parents about the birds and the bees of making babies. Anyways, so you had Moses, who went in and became an Egyptian by adoption, basically. He was raised by his Hebrew mother, but lived in the courts with the Egyptians. Now, did he actually know that he was a Hebrew right away? Did he grow up knowing about it? Or did his mom teach him about the Hebrews, but not tell him who he was? Don't know. These are a lot of things that are not known of, especially including in the Bible. Was Moses a person? Well, in writings, we don't know. It is in the Bible or the Torah, but it's actually not in, his name is not mentioned, as far as I know, not mentioned in the in history, in archaeological findings, as in ancient archaeological findings. But there is a time when the whole Egyptian economy fell apart. Now, some historians love to say, oh, it was happening in earlier years. It was happening in, the Exodus happened in like 1400 BC. Well, actually, there's a possibility of it. I will not say there's not. There are some things that actually can point to that. But there's more things that actually point to Ramses II. Now, Ramses II had 66 years of, a strong economy. And by the time he left, the economy was tanking. And the construction stopped. And a lot of people like to say, well, this is possibly because he lost a huge portion of his slaves. Is it true? Could be. Very much could be. Is it false? There's a chance it could be false. But there's no reason for the economy to decline unless something happened, and labor is probably one of the biggest things that would have changed that. Okay, so again, I'm trying to be as balanced as possible. So let's go forward. Again, I'm reading from the curriculum, so there's a lot of things in here. Moses' life. Now we're going to get to the Midians. So Moses leaves Egypt. He leaves Egypt because, according to the Bible, he doesn't like the treatment of the slaves, ones being beaten or such. I don't remember exactly how it's put, but that he stops and kills an Egyptian. Well, there could be a lot of different reasons also that he left. But he left and went to go live with the Midians. Now, the Midians are a people frequently talked about in the Bible, and often, I mean, there's not really much talking about of Jethro or the Midians in archaeological findings. But there are nomadic people that are just like the Midians. So, archaeological findings, and this is actually interesting. We're going to read this straight from the curriculum. This is interesting when it comes to the Midians. Archaeological findings in northwest Arabia and southern Jordan areas traditionally associated with the Midians suggest that they were skilled in copper mining and metalworking. Excavations have uncovered remains of mining camps and smelting operations, indicating that the Midians had a practical knowledge of metallurgy, a skill that was valuable in desert survival and trading. Their nomadic lifestyle and practical wisdom in desert living would later be crucial to Moses as he led out the Hebrews through a similar landscape. Okay, so I'm in the curriculum, I'm actually talking about the archaeological findings behind it. So there's a lot more when it comes to this. But yeah, so it goes through the Midians, who they were, who Jethro would have been, and him talking to Moses and teaching him about their God. Now, interesting enough, the Midians are said to have actually been a religious group that actually knew God, knew the God of Abraham and Isaac and such. They were actually, and this is a very, very good chance that they could actually have this, because remember when we talked about the Quran and the Bible and how they actually tell a lot of the similar stories of Abraham? Well, who says that Abraham's beliefs were not shared with others, which spurred other religious movements around the time? Again, we don't know. We weren't there. But I'm trying to give you a basic idea of all these things that were happening. Okay, so then Moses goes back to Egypt. Now, there's one really cool thing before I go talk about this. Ever heard of the burning bush? Mount Sinai. So this is really interesting because there is actually a cathedral that is held by Christians, Jews, and also Muslims. This is the St. Catherine's Monastery. Now, the Muslims actually might have a different name, but this is a historical and religious site for them, for all three groups. Now they have this cathedral that is up in Mount Sinai. Now my father actually visited this and took pictures. Well, took pictures of the mountain. I don't think he was allowed to take pictures of the bush, but he actually went to see this bush that's in the middle of Mount Sinai, which is like there's no bushes around. There's just one bush, and it's this one plant. This is like the only one anywhere. It doesn't burn. It doesn't. The wood does not burn. It cannot be lit on fire. Now, is he saying that they actually put? I can't remember. Again, this is like 30 years ago that he told me the story when he was in Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. Now, I don't remember if he actually said they put a light underneath it or a fire underneath and try to light it on fire. I don't know. But this is what they're saying is potentially the same bush or a like bush that was during this time. The bush is still there after however many 100 years that the monastery has been there. Bushes don't usually last that long. Just saying. Okay, so I actually go through St. Catherine's Monastery because it's a historical site. You need to check that out. It's in the curriculum. Okay, going on. Moses has a mission now to go back to Egypt. I'm going to bypass the plagues because that's a religious portion of it, and there's no actual archaeological evidence of that. But Moses goes back and has words with the Pharaoh. Ramses II, we'll say. Again, we're not 100% sure. Well, he has this conversation with Ramses, and Ramses says, I'm not going to let my people go. In the curriculum, I actually talk about how the conversation would be between the Pharaoh, not Moses, Pharaoh and his advisors, because I wanted you to see how an advisory worked in Egypt. Now, and again, this is not me writing it. I say a lot of me, but this is my historians writing it and being able to provide this information. And again, some are religious, some not so religious. Okay, so moving forward, Moses had to convince the Pharaoh to let the people go. How he actually did it, nobody knows. There's no reason. Again, a lot of historians doubt that this actually happened. But again, there was a fall of the economy during Ramses II, which could be because of the loss of people. So, if that's the point, Moses was able to convince Pharaoh to let his people go. Again, we're taking this with a grain of salt. This is what we know could be true from it. Now, this is a huge shake for this is a very hard thing for the Pharaoh to do because his kingdom is basically upheld and built upon the backs of slaves. Not just Hebrews, Nubian, Syrian, Jordanian. Well, they weren't even Jordanian at the time, or Syrian. There's a lot of different Levant. So there's a lot of slaves here mixed in together. So in the end, not all the slaves were leaving. In the end, even some of the Hebrews stayed. It's their lifestyle. A lot of these were probably the higher class, as we were talking about, of slaves. And so some are said to possibly have had stayed in Egypt. Now, let's keep going. So Moses convinces the Pharaoh to release the Hebrews. They go out and leave Egypt. I should bring up a map of this. I did not bring it before, so let me bring up a map really fast. I need to show you this. This is of the Sinai Peninsula. This is basically where this is all happening. So I'm going to bring this out here so we can see it. If you're watching the YouTube channel, you'll see a world map, and we're going to go over to Egypt. So this is Egypt. Now, the Hebrews were all throughout Egypt, but they needed to get over here to the Sinai Valley, Mount Sinai. Let's see. Let's actually write that in. Mount Sinai. See, I was already looking it up. Oh, okay, just zooming out just a sec. Okay, yeah. So Mount Sinai. This is the Mount Sinai Peninsula. Egypt, Mount Sinai. Supposedly, the Hebrews left, went west, and made it to the ocean. Made it to the Red Sea. Why they didn't go higher? Probably because it would have been too far of a walk, and because, again, on the religious side, God would probably have known that Pharaoh would have changed his mind at some point and sent people to stop them. So instead of walking all the way up from Upper Egypt, all the way up past Cairo and over into the Sinai, they crossed over. Now, when Moses most likely did it, he probably went through the trade routes, back into Egypt. And there was trade routes all the time coming into Egypt from the Sinai there. There was trade routes everywhere. There was a lot of different people coming out from all different places. Okay, so in order to get to Sinai, the fastest route from point A to point B is a straight line, right? Let me close this. Okay, so according to potential history, like again, we don't know this is actually true, they would have crossed over somewhere on the west side of western side of the Red Sea, this area right here, trying to get over to the eastern side. Now, there's only certain parts in here where the water is not that as deep. And so they actually suppose that it might be those areas. There was an archaeologist who came over and floated and dove to find out if there's any chance that this was actually true. And what he found was he found some potential artifacts. Now I say potential artifacts because what happens when you have something that's been there for a few hundred years? One, it degrades. And two, any kind of metal, so metallurgy, any kind of iron, steel, copper, those things will stay, but they'll end up being covered by coral. Well, coral, you can't exactly just tear up coral and put it. It's a living organism that's actually protected in a lot of areas, including the Red Sea. So in here, you have a lot of different places of coral that is built up over time. Potentially, there have been, what they found is the potential of axles from chariots that are there. Now, are they actually true? I don't know. Historians discount it. Archaeologists sometimes discount it. But from the findings that he had, it more makes them question it instead of just saying, oh, it's not true. Well, okay, you want to prove that it's not true, grab those coral reefs and bring them in and break them apart. Let's see if there's metal in them. Thing is, they won't do that. So until they actually do that, we can't tell if it's actually true or not. The findings of this archaeologist that went diving for evidence. He brought back pictures, but he was not allowed to touch the living organisms down underneath. So, yes, is there potential that they found it? Yes. Are they allowed to find it? No. So, who knows? Okay, so going further, they break out of Egypt and they come out into Sinai. Now, the reason why you'd find chariots and axles and stuff like that is because according to the Bible, the Red Sea parted and they were able to walk across. They were able to walk from Egypt into the Sinai. And then all of a sudden, the water came back together. As the Pharaoh changed his mind, sent chariots, and they went down into the river, and down into the waterbeds, and the waters collapsed on top of the Pharaoh's soldiers. So, they couldn't go around. I mean, that was way too far to go around, especially if it was down here. So, what happened? Not quite sure. Is there proof? Not quite sure. Again, this is where faith comes in, if you're religious. Okay, so going from there, they come into Sinai. We're not going to be talking about that today. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Important things happen in Sinai because the Hebrews basically become Israel. This is where it starts to happen. And their laws are created. Their writings are written down. Again, everything before it, a lot of it has to be taken on faith or oral tradition. But before that point, it wasn't really written down. There's no records before, as far as I know, there are no records before Moses wrote them down in Sinai to say it's actually true. When they came to the Sinai, they had peace, and they were there for 40 years. So they had some time to actually write some things down. Created language. They actually might have had a written language. I'm not quite sure. I got to look at that back. It's a great thing for you to look up. So that's it. That's my my look into this history. Very fascinating. Can it be proven? No. If it could be proven, would people accept it? There will probably be people that still wouldn't accept it. if it was proven false, would people accept it? No, they'd still go by faith. Sorry, if those things were not archaeological findings, let's say in the Red Sea or such. But there's actually no way that you can actually prove that the Hebrews were not there. I mean, you can't actually have someone say, during this time, there were no Hebrews in Egypt. You can't do that. Because anybody that says there were no Hebrews in Egypt that actually has understanding about that couldn't say that, because if they mention Hebrews, how would they mention Hebrews if they weren't there? So there's no way of disproving it, and there's no way of proving it as of right now. There are snippets that you can get. So in the curriculum, at the end of each chapter, you'll actually see the archaeological findings and the source documents that we use. I'm actually trying to bring this up. Okay, here we go. So in this, you'll be able to see yeah, you'll be able to see the archaeological findings that we have, and there are a good amount of them, not just in Egypt, but also in Sinai. Everywhere we go, every unit that we do, we want to have that archaeological findings so that you can actually see where this is coming from and how this is proven. At the same time, nothing's proven 100%, especially in history. It's so hard to get anything to be 100%, because again, every time a new regime comes in, a new pharaoh, a new king, they have the possibility of changing history. And who changed them? You don't know, because they won't tell you that they're going to change. They changed it, because they're going to say this is history as they want it. So we take it with a grain of salt, and we learn from it as much as possible. And what can you learn from the Bible? A whole heck of a lot. Not just on the religious side, but the ethical, the moral side, and such. So was slavery bad? Yeah, according to the Bible, it's bad. Okay, according to history, it's bad. There you go. Moral and ethical. Those are great things to learn about, which is also a reason why to read the Bible. Even if it wasn't religious, you just want to have those things. So, or to familiarize yourself with it and the teachings that are in it. Again, this goes for any book that has truth in it. You want to be able to glean from, because you're learning. And what about religion? We can't say. It's not my part. This is a secular understanding of it based on a religious document, yes, but it's still a secular reading of it, because we're trying to help you understand what happened in history, or what possibly happened in history. And we're giving you all the proof to go with it in the curriculum. So thank you so much for joining us on this great Adventure Box podcast day, and we will talk to you later. Take care. Have a great day. We will see you on Thursday with what happened in the Sinai. So thanks again. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.